Thank you very much, Charlotte. As I mentioned yesterday, we're very happy that in addition to Sustainable Companies project team members, we also received some very interesting abstracts as response to our call for papers. So one of the international scholars who is new to our meetings is the next speaker. And correct me if I pronounce your name wrong, because I didn't get a chance to check that with you beforehand, but Raphael Heffron?
Yeah.
Raphael, yeah. From Sterling, who will speak about reporting in a context that combines some of the issues that we need to discuss, an issue which Robert Mierge also touched upon about subsidies. So we're very interested to hearing your presentation. Please go ahead.
Okay, well, thanks to the organizers for an excellent conference. And just to begin, well, my name is Raphael Heffron from the University of Stirling in Scotland, and my paper is dealing with energy subsidy reporting. And what I suppose I'm targeting directly energy companies, those responsible for a large majority of our CO2 emissions. And just a brief overview, I'll first present, the issue of energy subsidies and the current problems, go through the case for reform, and then and then talk about my solution. So if we look at energy subsidies and why they're increasingly important and increasingly a topical issue in many countries. And in many countries in the past, I suppose, decade, and in many countries at the moment, there's new energy law and policy being developed. And this new energy law and policy is being developed solely really to move us towards low carbon economies. Much of the law in the area is actually about creating subsidies to ignite or to try and develop the low carbon economy. However, the energy subsidy problem or real issue actually lies in the past and an ongoing issue. And that is that fossil fuel energy sources receive an enormous amount of subsidies. And this is in the form of tax relief, which is for existing new and speculative projects. And the aim for a lot of these tax reliefs for the oil and gas industry is to allow a project rapidly recover its costs. And that's a quote from the purpose of UK tax legislation in the area. And one of the problems is, at the moment, is that, and for the past, that it's been very difficult to calculate fossil fuel subsidies. So these tax reliefs, it's been very difficult to calculate them. And some could argue that, that is strange, but a couple of people mentioned lobbying yesterday. And just last year in the US election year, when we look at the amount of money that was spent on advertising by the fossil fuel industry, it was close to 400 million in the US. That's in comparison to a mere 40 million by the low carbon industry. So you might wonder why it's difficult to calculate energy subsidies for the sector. However, some studies have attempted to calculate energy subsidies, and one is Texas. I suppose most of us would associate Texas a lot with the oil and gas industry, but its state accounting body has calculated in a report subsidies for the energy sector. And in this report, it showed that the fossil fuel sources were in receipt of the most subsidies. And also the Global Studies Initiative. This has been ongoing work really over the last decade. It's a body supported, based in Canada and supported by the UN Environmental Programme. And again, it has shown that the fossil fuel industry has received the most subsidies, near to 400 billion per annum. and that's in comparison to, that's a global figure or global estimate, and that's in comparison to 100 billion for low carbon sources. And the World Bank and IEA in a joint report said that that figure for fossil fuels was closer to 550 billion. And just the final point, what needs to be realised as we go forward and we try and reduce CO2 emissions and looking at companies and sustainability is that there's a major difference between the subsidies received for fossil fuels and low carbon energy sources. So the major difference is that fossil fuels receive subsidies when they're in construction or production of that oil or gas. And that's in contrast to low carbon energy sources, which by and large only receive subsidies when they actually produce electricity. And this is a major consequence in terms of the cost for a project. A lot of low carbon energy projects, the upfront costs are quite big. This costs a lot in loan interest. And we saw from Professor Turnbull yesterday, who presented a comparison between fossil fuel and renewable energy resources and showed that interest costs were one of the key factors. So if we look at the case for reform, and I would argue that at the moment there's a compelling case to reform the subsidy issue and to help to have more sustainable companies and into the future more sustainable economic growth. And I will just run quickly through these because each of them could be nearly seen as a further discussion or paper in its own right. At the moment we have the Aarhus Convention, which does give us the right to access to environmental information. We also have international mechanisms at the moment, such as the Global Subsidies Initiative that I mentioned, but also the EITI, the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. And this is a cooperative agreement internationally between many countries and companies that actually, where companies report how much they pay for a license to extract resources. So this shows that there is some cooperation on some issues in relation to the energy sector. Then there's the polluter pays principle. Is this applied sufficiently enough in terms of energy subsidies? And as our speakers earlier keynote speakers mentioned, we are entering a new era in terms of the age of corporate responsibility. This information disclosure and energy subsidy reporting is, it's not commercially sensitive information. So there's no reason for it not to be disclosed. There's also the issue of equity and justice across generations. And we need to assure affordable supplies for our populations. And we also need to ensure that there's sustainable future supply of energy into the future. And the final issue, targeting best technology. And this is a key issue. What we want to be asking in society is, are we supporting the best technology? And through energy subsidies and the figures that I've told you about, it seems that we actually are supporting, perhaps one of the worst technologies. And there's further danger at the moment in terms of the support or potential support being given to shale gas and shale oil technology. So just to talk about the solution to this, and essentially this solution would involve the disclosure of the information on energy subsidy reporting as a note to accounts, a note to annual accounts for companies. And what this would do is it would allow us to provide an actual true cost of fossil fuels. And this is something, a couple of people criticized economics yesterday, and this is something, the economic models to date have not yet done. It would also give, the low carbon energy sources subsidy parity with fossil fuels, at the very least. And we should also give energy sources the opportunity to rapidly recover their their costs. So how would we do this? Well, we can introduce a new IFRS, or I suppose actually base it on the existing IAS, which allows for us to currently recover, it means that companies should provide information on the government grants they receive. So it will be extending this to what tax reliefs they actually receive. So this is an opportune time, I think, at the moment. Currently, the conceptual framework is being developed, and the conceptual framework is where principles are identified for developing and revising IFRS. So I would argue that in this conceptual framework, we should be looking at adding in environmental impact into one of these principles when we revise IFRSs. An advantage of this would be that IFRSs can be enforceable in the EU, and there's also the secondary option of introducing it at a national level in company or tax law. So just to conclude, a transparent system will have many benefits, and as I said, we need to decrease the support for fossil fuels, give low carbon energy sources at least the same support, and increase the financial support, increase the chance for the financial support and for low carbon energy projects, and reduce their borrowing costs. The onus should be on companies to, not governments, to report this issue. The G20 talks have discussed this issue, but it's rather stagnated on national governments who are sort of meant to report on this issue. If this issue is put to the forefront, it will influence climate change discussions. And as some of the speakers yesterday said, carbon emissions are increasing potentially by 4%, by 4 degrees, when really the limit should be at 2 degrees. And this is an area where we can stop oil and gas production, maybe at source, and highlight the possibly cheaper low carbon energy sources. And as Anders said yesterday, our current policy and law in this area is that we're bankrupting nature, and really we're losing our environmental capital. And through energy subsidies, we are actually paying for that privilege. So thank you.